Good morning, Dominic Steele, Daily Bible Time. And look, this morning, dealing with a few of the questions that came up at Village Church yesterday, Sunday. Yesterday we were looking at Exodus chapter 5 through to 10. It was the first 9 plagues, and most of the questions are relating to the issue of Pharaoh hardening his heart. And these were mostly submitted after Village mornings, although one came in after Village evenings. Look, if you're not a member of Village Church, if you missed that sermon, let me encourage you to hop onto the podcast, hop onto the, we'll go to the Village Church website and check out that sermon. We're on a journey through the book of Exodus at the moment. Somebody's asked, and they've noted that Exodus 7 says that Moses performed miracles, but then the magicians, the Egyptian magicians, did the same. What's the logic behind claiming that Moses' acts were miraculous and the magicians were not? Just incidentally, I did not claim that the magicians' actions were not miraculous. But what is happening here with these first 2 plagues? Well, God sent 2 plagues, and then the Egyptian magicians were able, the text reports, to recreate something that appeared to match those plagues. And then at the 3rd plague, the magicians couldn't match that plague, and they called the power that Moses was exercising the finger of God, the authority of God. They recognized that Moses was acting with God's authority. So at that point, plague 3, the magicians, the Egyptian magicians, were convinced that this was God at work, whereas Pharaoh still had a hard heart. But what was going on with these first 2 plagues? Well, my take is that the Egyptian magicians, I'd actually call them the Egyptian occult magicians, were exercising a genuine supernatural power. I've read a couple of commentaries, and neither of them suggested that the magicians weren't able to do the acts that were described in the first 2 plagues, although the commentators both questioned why, as Pharaoh's agents, they didn't seek to reduce the effect of the river being turned to blood, or reduce the multiplication of frogs, in that to reduce the effect of the river being turned to blood, to turn it back into water, or to reduce the number of frogs, that would have been in the interests of the Egyptian people. Rather, they found it interesting that both times the Egyptian magicians made things ultimately worse for the inhabitants of Egypt by exacerbating the effects of the plagues. But it does seem to be the case that we should take it that these people were able to exercise their actions with a genuine supernatural power. And in the Old and New Testament, there do seem to be evil authorities with supernatural powers exercised separate from God's explicit direction, but limited authority, unlike the so potent rather than omnipotent. Oh dear. So they are potent, they are not omnipotent, able to do anything as in the power of God is. I'm thinking of the demons that we meet in the gospel accounts, or the witch of Endor, who Saul consults and is condemned for consulting, or the powers and authorities in the spiritual realms that get mentioned in Colossians and in other letters of Paul. I don't doubt that these agencies have real power, and I'm encouraged by the scriptures to avoid them. But what is significant, that although they have real power, that power, it can only match the first 2 plagues. They're out. After that, their power is real but finite. And I think the scriptures say quite clearly, avoid those supernatural but evil authorities. Now, another question. 9:12. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. God could have softened Pharaoh's heart. How is God not responsible? Well, God is responsible. God is responsible for his actions. He's sovereign over all. He's sovereign over the heart of the king. God, in his sovereignty for his own plans and purposes, is actually responsible for everything that happens in the world. Sometimes the insurance claims, they call them acts of God. And that's a sign that people in past days saw that God was responsible for the lightning, for the flood, for the catastrophe. That's true of the wild storm, but it's actually also true, ultimately, of the decisions of the king, even the evil king. You can't absolve God of responsibility. I think that a fault of the pagan heart is to be evil, but God limits, restricts that evil intent, and consequently the evil actions much of the time. Now, the questioner notes that God could have softened Pharaoh's heart, and that's exactly right. God could have softened Pharaoh's heart, but God raised him up for this purpose and gave him a hard heart for this purpose, so that God's power might be displayed as being more powerful than the Pharaoh. We saw that in the passage yesterday. But also we note the line in Proverbs 21:1, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, like rivers of water. He turns it wherever he wishes. Or in the older translations, the king's heart is like a watercourse. He directs it wherever he wants it to go. You know, sometimes you read that river flows have changed. They used to flow through this way, but now they flow around this bend. Well, they found a new way through the soft earth. God turned the direction of that river. Well, God can turn the heart of the king one way or another, as he chooses, towards him, against him. Final question. Does God harden people's hearts like Pharaoh today? What form does this take? The answer is yes. God is in control of people's hearts today, just like he was back then. He can harden hearts, he can soften hearts, which is why we pray. So I pray that God might soften someone's heart to bring about vertical restoration of relationship between that person and God. Or I pray that God might soften someone's heart to bring about a horizontal restoration between two individuals. Or I pray that God might cause somebody's heart to turn so that a particular outcome that I'm hoping to see happen would happen. And I pray because God is 100% responsible and able to change things. Now, I just want to note that there's more to say on this. I've suggested to our community group leaders, we've given our community group leaders a special study on predestination and recommended that they do that over the next couple of weeks with you. And so I hope that will give you a really good discussion on these things. But I think many of us, we go through life as Christians not really grasping that God is completely sovereign, that God is really king. And as really king, we really ought to pay him homage. The lordship of God, the lordship of Jesus is even bigger than we thought. Thanks for joining us on Daily Bible Time today. See you tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, and we'll pick up in Isaiah 12 then. God bless.